Imagine dying for an entire hour and being taken to an unknown realm where time and reality as we know it do not exist. What would you do if a mysterious voice told you that your life is not over and that you have an urgent message to bring back to the world? This was the shocking experience of James Miller, a skeptical and methodical man who, after a heart attack, was transported to a place beyond human understanding. But what did he see? What did you hear? And, more importantly, what is this powerful message he must share? Have you ever wondered what happens in the brief moment between life and death? What James brought back from his experience defies everything he believed. How did this revelation completely change your outlook on love, family, and purpose? And how does he live now, knowing what few have the chance to witness? Get ready for a story of profound transformation, where death is not the end, but an unexpected beginning. I'm Anthony Bennett, and welcome to my Near-Death Experience channel. Let's listen to the story together. James Miller, a 42-year-old civil engineer, lived in Denver, Colorado, with his wife Sarah and their two children, Emily and Mark. James was a practical and methodical man, known for his analytical mind and for always seeking rational solutions to everyday problems. His life was planned with precision, like any engineering project he led. He rarely showed interest in spiritual or philosophical issues, preferring to remain focused on the concrete aspects of life. Sarah, unlike James, was a dreamy and spiritual woman. She liked to meditate, talk about energies and firmly believed that there was something beyond the material world. James, there are more things between heaven and earth than your engineering can explain, she used to joke. He just laughed and replied, I think I've worked out all the necessary calculations on that. Her children, Emily, 10, and Mark, 7, were the center of her life. Despite his reserved personality, James was a devoted father and enjoyed spending Sunday afternoons in the park with them, although his mind was always focused on work. He felt that things had to be organized and under control, both at home and in the office. James' coworkers admired him for his competence and focus. He was the type of person who avoided any kind of drama and had little patience for emotional matters. When a colleague talked about coincidences or the idea of destiny, he always dismissed the topic with a polite but skeptical smile. I believe in what I can measure and calculate, was what he said. A curious fact about James was that, despite his skepticism, he was afraid of death. This was something he would never admit, but when Sarah brought it up, he quickly changed the subject. This is a waste of time, Sarah. We only have one life, and we better make the most of it by doing something productive. But deep down, this idea worried him. With a seemingly controlled and predictable life, James had no idea that anything out of the ordinary could happen. His daily routine and his attachment to concrete were a refuge that provided him with a sense of security. What he didn't know was that a profoundly transformative experience was about to shatter that barrier of control he held dear. The big change in his life began on an ordinary day, a Friday, when he was preparing for another long day of work. The day started like any other, with family breakfast and the usual commute to the office. However, that Friday was destined to become the day that changed everything. James said goodbye to Sarah and the children as usual. He had a big project to finish, related to a bridge being built in downtown Denver. The work required concentration and meticulous planning, exactly the kind of challenge he enjoyed. As he left the house, he felt a slight discomfort in his chest, but he ignored it, believing it was just stress. Are you okay? Sarah asked when she saw him massaging his chest. Yes, it's just a little tired. Nothing to worry about, he replied, with his typical calm tone. Sarah, as always, gave him a kiss on the cheek and said, just take care of yourself, okay? Don't ignore these signs. James smiled, took the keys and left. During the commute to work, the discomfort began to increase. The traffic was heavy, and he found himself breathing more slowly, trying to ease the spreading pain. "It'll pass. I just need to get to the office and relax a little," he thought, trying to stay focused. When he arrived at the office, he felt that something was really wrong. He wasn't the kind of man who admitted weakness easily, but this pain was no longer something he could ignore. Still, he sat at his desk and tried to work, but his vision began to blur, and the pain intensified. In a matter of minutes, he fell unconscious. "James! Someone call an ambulance," shouted his coworker, Tom, as he rushed to help him. The room turned into chaos, with people calling emergency services and trying to provide first aid. When the ambulance arrived, he was completely unresponsive, and his heart had stopped beating. The paramedic team did their best to revive him, but James was no longer there. Time seemed to have stopped while he was between life and death. For nearly an hour, James was pronounced clinically dead. Doctors didn't have much hope of resuscitating him, but suddenly, after one last attempt at resuscitation, his heart started beating again. What no one knew at the time was that, during that 1 hour, James had been transported to a place that defied all his beliefs. When James finally opened his eyes, he was no longer the same man. He had experienced something so inexplicable and profound that his outlook on life, death, and reality was about to be completely transformed. During the time he was dead, James experienced something that could never be explained by numbers or formulas. He found himself in a completely different place, a kind of ethereal realm, where time and space did not have the same meaning. "Where am I?" he asked himself, realizing he was floating in a vast field of light. The colors around him were impossible to describe. He felt an overwhelming peace, something he had never experienced in his life. "This can't be real," he repeated to himself. But, at the same time, everything there seemed more real than his own existence until that moment. There was a presence there with him, something greater, that he couldn't fully understand, but felt deeply. "James," a soft voice echoed around him. He looked around, but he couldn't see anyone. "You need to understand. There is more than you can calculate or understand. There is more than meets the eye." He was paralyzed, unable to speak. The voice seemed to come from inside and outside him at the same time. He had never felt so scared and peaceful at the same time. "What is this? Am I dead?" he finally asked, trying to cling to some logic. The response was absolute silence, but a silence that said it all. James realized he wasn't dead, but he wasn't alive in the way he knew it either. He was in a space between worlds, a place of transition. Then he saw images of his life. His children, his wife, his friends, everything seemed so far away, but at the same time so close. "You still have a purpose," the voice said again. "There's something you need to take back." James felt an urgency rising within him, as if he had something very important to do, but he didn't know what it was. "What do I need to do? What does this mean?" He felt lost, but at the same time filled with new clarity. The message he received was not for him at that moment, but he knew he would carry it back to the world of the living. His mind, so logical and skeptical, struggled to understand what was happening. "You can't understand everything now," the voice continued. "But you will know when the time is right. The world needs this message, and you will be the bearer." With those words, James began to feel his body being pulled back into the real world, but his mind was still trapped in that mysterious realm. When James opened his eyes, the bright light of the hospital made him blink repeatedly. The sound of machines beeping around him and the low murmur of doctors talking brought him back to reality. His body felt heavy, as if he had been pulled out of a deep sleep. He looked around, confused, trying to understand where he was and what had happened. That's when he saw Sarah, sitting next to the bed, holding his hand. She cried silently, but when she realized he was awake, she exclaimed in a trembling voice, "James! My God, you're back! What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse and weak. "You had a heart attack in the office. Your heart stopped for almost an hour," she explained, her eyes teary. "The doctors did their best, but they said there wasn't much hope. And then, suddenly, you came back. As if something brought you back." Sarah's words still sounded distant, as if he were somewhere else, still connected to that mysterious realm. The doctor entered the room, relieved to see James conscious. "James, you gave us quite a scare," said Dr. Matthews. "His heart stopped for almost an hour, something almost impossible to reverse. We had to make several attempts at resuscitation, but something different happened." James just looked at him, unable to put into words what he had experienced. I saw something," he said, with difficulty. The doctor exchanged a look with Sarah, as if it was just the effect of the medication or the trauma, but James knew there was something much deeper behind it. "James, don't worry about it right now," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "The important thing is that you're alive. We'll be monitoring you closely over the next few hours, but it looks like you're recovering well considering what you've been through." The doctor said goodbye and left the room, leaving James and Sarah alone. The silence between them was heavy, but Sarah knew there was something more behind her husband's gaze. "You said you saw something. What was it, James?" Sarah asked gently, feeling he needed to share that. James stared at the ceiling, trying to find the right words. "It wasn't a dream. I was in another place, a place I can't explain. There was a light, a peace, but also a voice. Something, or someone, told me I had a message for Bring It Back." Sarah was silent for a moment, taking this in. "A message," she repeated, eyes wide. "What message?" James shook his head. "I don't know. I still don't understand what it means. I just know that I've been taken to a place, a realm that is beyond anything I have ever imagined." Sarah held his hand tighter. "Do you believe now?" she asked, referring to the many conversations they had already had about spirituality and what could exist beyond life. James sighed. "I don't know what to believe, but I know my life will never be the same after this." He was confused and at the same time certain that what he experienced was not just an illusion. Whatever that kingdom was, he knew the message he received was coming. Something bigger awaited him, but he still didn't know what it was or how to interpret it. In the days that followed, James was admitted to the hospital under observation. He was visited by friends and family, all impressed by the miraculous recovery that the doctors talked about so much. "You're a miracle, James," said Tom, his coworker, on one visit. "Most people don't come back after so long." James just nodded, but his reflections went far beyond returning to life. He was obsessed with understanding what he had seen and heard during his NDE. The memories of that kingdom were beginning to mix with reality. He clearly remembered the indescribable colors, the deep peace he felt, and the voice that spoke to him of a greater purpose. But what disturbed him most was the sense of urgency to bring something back to the world. "Why me?" he asked himself every night. "What should I do now?" Sarah, sensing his uneasiness, tried to help him process everything. "Maybe you were chosen for a reason," she suggested as they talked at home, a few days after he was discharged. "It could be that this experience has something to do with the way you've always tried to control everything. Maybe the purpose is for you to let go of some of that logic and open yourself up to something bigger." But James still struggled with the idea of something that couldn't be proven or explained. "That doesn't make sense," he said repeatedly, frustrated. "I know what I saw, what I felt, but how can I believe in something that goes against everything I know? And that message, how can I deliver it if I don't even know what it is?" Days turned into weeks, and James continued to reflect on his experience. The voice from the other realm echoed in his mind. He began to have vivid dreams where he relived parts of that journey. In one of the dreams, he was again in front of the light and heard the voice repeat, "You will know when the time is right." These words brought him more questions than answers. "Sarah, what is expected of me now?" he asked during a night when he couldn't sleep. "I can't just go back to work and pretend like nothing happened. I feel like I'm being pulled into something bigger, but I don't know what it is." She looked at him with understanding, not trying to give easy answers. "Maybe the message will come in time, James. It doesn't have to be now. But when it does, you'll know what to do." James, who had always lived a controlled and planned life, now found himself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He knew his life was changing in profound ways, but what bothered him most was waiting for the message he was supposed to share with the world. A few weeks after his recovery, James decided to return to work. His colleagues welcomed him with joy, and everyone treated him as a kind of walking miracle. But he was no longer the same man. The feeling of having experienced something transcendental haunted him, and he felt distant from the daily activities that previously filled him with satisfaction. In an office meeting, James found himself distracted, looking out the window. The view of the city of Denver seemed different, as if something was missing. What was once so familiar now felt empty. All of this isn't important anymore, he thought, as his boss talked about deadlines and goals. The material world he valued so much now seemed trivial. After the meeting, Tom, his friend and coworker, asked him for coffee. "You've been very quiet since you got back, James," Tom said worriedly. "Everything is fine?" James hesitated for a moment, but decided to share. "I feel like I'm carrying something I can't understand, Tom. Something happened to me, and I feel like I need to do something with it, but I don't know what." "Something like, what exactly?" Tom asked, intrigued. James looked at him, searching for the right words. "I was in a place, a different realm. I don't know how to explain it, but I was between life and death. And there, they told me that I needed to bring a message back. But I still don't know what it is, this message." Tom listened silently, trying to process what his friend was saying. "Man, that's really intense. You've always been so logical, and now you're talking about something that doesn't even sound like you." James laughed nervously. "I know, that's what scares me. Everything I believe seems small compared to what I've experienced. But I need to figure out what to do with this information. I feel like the world is waiting for it." Over the next few days, James found himself reflecting more and more on his mission. He began studying near-death experiences and reading about other people who had been through similar situations. This helped him understand that he was not alone in his journey. However, he still felt that his experience was unique, and the message he had to deliver was still hidden somewhere inside him. When will the time be, he thought, as life continued around him. The voice of the unknown realm still echoed in his mind, and he knew that, soon, he would be called to act in ways he had never imagined. The months passed, and James continued to have the feeling that something was coming. However, he still didn't know what to do with the message he carried. One day, while he was having breakfast, something strange happened. He looked at Sarah and her children and, for the first time since his near-death experience, he felt a deep calm. As if, suddenly, all the pieces started to fall into place. There was a new clarity in his mind. "I know what it is," he murmured, almost without realizing it. Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you know, James?" He looked into her eyes, with an expression she had never seen before. "The message. I think I get it now." Sarah set her coffee cup aside, eager to hear what he had to say. "All this time, I've been waiting for something great, something out of the ordinary. But I think the message is much simpler than that." James paused, and Sarah leaned forward, as if her life depended on what he would say next. "The message is that life is more than what we can see and touch. It's made up of our connections, the love we share, the little things we do for others. I worried so much about controlling everything, about understanding the world through logic, that I forgot that the most important thing cannot be measured. Sarah smiled, her eyes full of emotion. I always knew you had it in you, James, she said softly. But sometimes we need something big to remind us of what's really important. James nodded, taking in the depth of her words. The kingdom I saw, the voice I heard, all of that wasn't to give me an exact answer. It was to show me that I need to live differently. I need to open up more to others, stop being so rigid. While they were talking, Mark and Emily ran into the kitchen, laughing and joking. James looked at his children and realized that they were the key to everything he was seeking. I want them to grow up knowing that life is full of mysteries, but that the love and connections we make are what really matter, he thought. His children were the living manifestation of the message he had received. At that moment, James made the decision to change his life. He knew that to honor the experience he had, he would need to act differently. Sarah, he began, I think it's time for me to do something more meaningful with my life. Maybe it's time to leave engineering and find a way to help others, to share what I've learned. Sarah wasn't surprised. She knew this moment would come ever since he came back from the hospital. I'm with you, James, whatever you decide. The clarity of his mission had finally revealed itself. The message he needed to share was not a divine revelation or a hidden secret, but a simple truth. Life is short, and we must live it with purpose, love, and connection. James knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. He was ready to change, and the journey that had begun with his near-death experience was now taking him on a new path. After that eye-opening morning, James began to make significant changes in his life. He realized that his profession, although fulfilling in many ways, no longer filled the emptiness he had felt since his NDE. With Sarah's help, he made the difficult decision to step away from the world of engineering to pursue something more aligned with the new purpose he had discovered. Are you sure you want to do this? Sarah asked as they discussed the future one night. It's a big change, James. He smiled, already more confident than he had ever been. I've never been so sure about anything in my entire life, Sarah. I want to work on something that makes a difference in people's lives, something that allows me to share what I've learned from my experience. I need to live in a more meaningful way. James began volunteering with community organizations and support groups for people who had gone through traumatic experiences. He felt drawn to these stories, recognizing in them an echo of the transformation he had experienced. The world is full of people who need a helping hand, someone to remind them of the value of life, he told Tom in a cafe, explaining why he had left his engineering job. Tom, although surprised, supported him. Man, if anyone can help these people, it's you. Over time, James realized that he didn't need an exact answer for what he had experienced. He began to accept that what he experienced was partly for himself, but also for others. His story began to be told at community events and gatherings, where he shared his NDE and the lessons he had learned. The near-death experience showed me that we don't control everything, and that's a good thing, he said, moving to the groups he spoke to. His transformation also profoundly impacted his relationship with Sarah and his children. He became a more present husband and a more involved father. James now made a point of making time for simple moments, like family outings or long conversations with Sarah at night. He finally understood the value of what he previously saw as banal. I had to lose everything for a moment to appreciate what was right in front of me the whole time, he confessed to Sarah, in one of those moments of reflection. Emily and Mark also felt the difference in their father. He was now more relaxed, more open to listening to their stories, and less obsessed with work. Mark, in particular, once commented, "Dad, you seem different. You don't get mad anymore when we make a mess." James laughed and replied, "It's because I learned that some things are more important than clutter." The changes in his life were not dramatic or full of grand gestures, but they were full of depth and meaning. The message James brought back from his brush with death was not something he could share all at once. It was something he would live every day, in a discreet but powerful way. James's life was completely transformed after the NDE, but not in the spectacular way he initially imagined. His journey was now one of meaning and simplicity. He began to value the small connections of everyday life and see beauty in moments that he previously considered commonplace. I thought I needed to change the world, but I realized that I actually needed to change the way I lived in it, he told Sarah one night. Sarah continued to be her biggest support and source of inspiration. She saw the change in James and was grateful to have her husband back, but in a much more present and attentive way. "You found what you were looking for, didn't you?" she asked. James nodded. "Yes, and the answer was right in front of me the whole time. I just needed a push to see it." James decided to formalize his new purpose by founding a small support group for people who, like him, had experienced near-death experiences or profound trauma. He created a safe space to share stories, meditate on life and, most importantly, offer emotional support. The group quickly grew, and many people began attending their sessions. During one of these meetings, James spoke about his experience once again. "I saw a realm beyond life," he began, "but I don't think I was sent back with a divine message. I was sent back to understand the value of life here, now. Each of us has a purpose, and, sometimes, the simple fact that we are alive is enough." His message deeply touched everyone who heard him. He didn't offer easy answers, but he invited each person to reflect on what really mattered in their lives. "You don't need a near-death experience to appreciate what you have," he often said. "But if you do, let this be a reminder that the present is what really matters." James also found a new kind of peace within himself. The man who was once so obsessed with control and logic now accepted the mystery of life with humility. He no longer needed to have all the answers. Life is unpredictable, and that's what makes it so special, he reflected at one such meeting. "The message I got is that we need to be present for whatever happens." The weeks and months continued to pass, and James finally felt like he was living his truth. He no longer needed scientific or logical explanations to validate his experience. What mattered was the impact it had on his life and how he was using this transformation to help others. James's near-death experience was, without a doubt, a turning point in his life. She not only changed the way he viewed death, but also completely transformed the way he lived. He learned that, more than seeking answers, it was necessary to embrace uncertainty and live fully in the present. Life, for him, now had a new meaning. He no longer pursued material or professional achievements with the same intensity. Now, he was searching for something simpler and deeper, connection with people, love for his family, and a desire to help others find peace in their own journeys. James and Sarah remained strong in their relationship, now stronger than ever. They supported each other and learned, together, to value the small moments. Who knew such a frightening experience could bring us so much growth? Sarah often reflected. And James just smiled, grateful to have another chance to live authentically. His children also noticed the change in their father. Emily once said, "Daddy, you're always smiling now. It seems like you're always happy." And indeed he was. James had discovered that happiness didn't come from controlling the world around him, but from accepting and appreciating what he had. James knew that his experience wasn't something he could fully explain to others, but he also knew that it wasn't necessary. What mattered was how that journey changed him and what he would do with the time he still had. He didn't need a grand mission. He was already living his purpose, every day, through small choices of love and compassion. In the years that followed, James continued to help others understand their own near-death experiences, but most of all, he taught that you didn't need a traumatic experience to value life. "The message is always here," he said. You just have to be willing to listen. And so, James Miller lived out the rest of his days with the ease of someone who, for a brief moment, saw the other side and came away with a simple yet powerful truth. Life is to be lived with purpose, love, and above all else, of all, presence.